What if Steph Curry was traded to the Phoenix Suns? So as Stephen Curry's incredible play takes the Golden State to record-breaking heights and back-to-back MVPs, the rest of the NBA is left to wonder. What if? The Minnesota Timberwolves certainly have asked that question, as they drafted not one but 2 point guards, Ricky Rubio at number 5 and Johnny Flynn at number 6, ahead of Stephen Curry in the 2009 NBA draft. The Warriors took Stephen Curry at number 7, and the rest is history. But what people don't know is that at that time of the 2009 NBA draft, the Phoenix Suns had a very different idea of how history would unfold. The Suns, who had the 14th overall pick in the 2009 NBA draft, had negotiated a deal with the Warriors that would send All-Star center Amar'e Stoudemire to Golden State in exchange for its number 7 overall pick and additional players. At the time of all this, guess who was trying to get Curry to play for the Phoenix Suns? None other than the former general manager of the Phoenix Suns himself, Steve Kerr. Pretty crazy how things turned out in the end. Anyway, going into the 2009 NBA draft, with both teams not making the playoffs and having pretty disappointing seasons, the draft was a way to bring some new talent into the team. And so the draft looked like this. The LA Clippers selected Blake Griffin, the Memphis Grizzlies selected Hasheem Thabeet, the Oklahoma City Thunder selected James Harden, Tyreke Evans went to the Sacramento Kings, Ricky Rubio went to the Timberwolves, Johnny Flynn went to the Timberwolves as well, and with pick 7, the Golden State Warriors selected Stephen Curry. As soon as the Warriors took Curry at pick 7, immediately the Suns tried to negotiate a trade involving Amar'e Stoudemire to get Stephen Curry. That night, Steph almost ended up being traded to the Phoenix Suns for Amar'e Stoudemire on draft night, but as we all know, he wasn't. But this is how it all would have unfolded if it all went down. And this is, what if Steph Curry was traded to the Phoenix Suns? The Phoenix Suns would trade Amar'e Stoudemire to the Golden State Warriors. And with the 7th overall pick, the Phoenix Suns would select Stephen Curry. The plan that Steve Kerr had all along was to run Nash and Curry together. And he actually said this in an interview in 2014, when asked during an interview was the plan to run Stephen Curry with Steve Nash, Kerr responded quoting, "Oh yeah, that was the plan." So the start of the 2009-2010 season would have the Warriors roster looking like CJ Watson at the 1, Monta Ellis at shooting guard, Corey Maggette at the 3, Anthony Tolliver at the 4, and Amar'e Stoudemire playing the 5. On the bench, the Warriors still had an injured Stephen Jackson, but he was traded to the Charlotte Bobcats during the season. And the Phoenix Suns roster was looking like Steve Nash at the point, Jason Richardson playing shooting guard, Grant Hill at small forward, Channing Frye running the 4, and Robin Lopez locking down the middle. And obviously on the bench, the Suns would have a young point guard combo behind Nash with Dragic and Stephen Curry. Nash would be able to teach these young guys how to play, and Steph actually played a lot of this season at shooting guard because they had Dragic and Steve Nash already. This leads us to the 2009-2010 season, where the Warriors gained a few more wins with Amar'e, whilst the Phoenix Suns lost quite a lot of games with Curry and without Amar'e, as he was one of the main reasons why the Suns made it to the conference finals that year in real life. Instead, the Suns finished as the 7th seed, and were eliminated in the first round to the Dallas Mavericks, led by Dirk Nowitzki. All teams that originally made the playoffs stay in the playoffs, but they finish in different seeds. The Suns go from the 3rd seed to the 7th seed with the loss of Amar'e Stoudemire. The Warriors still missed the playoffs with their injury-ridden team behind the duo of Monta Ellis and Amar'e Stoudemire. They in fact only finished 1 seed higher, but in reality, they would win 6 more games with Amar'e than with Curry. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Amar'e would have made a huge difference that year, and they wouldn't have only won a few more games with him on that team, but in reality, when you break down the entire Warriors roster, look at all the injuries and talent that they had. A 32-win season was actually not that bad for the situation that they were in. As for the other teams around the league, LeBron James is still named the MVP, and the Lakers still win the 2010 NBA Championship in a 7-game series, beating the Boston Celtics. They won because of monster performances by Kobe and Pau Gasol, but it was an insane series that both the Lakers and the Celtics fans will remember forever. The Rookie of the Year still goes to Tyreke Evans, as he had a monster rookie season, putting up 20 points per game, 5 assists and 5 rebounds. And Steph Curry makes the All-Rookie First Team, and Amar'e still makes the All-NBA Second Team. From one crazy trade during the 2009 NBA draft, it actually has a huge effect on the entire 2010 NBA draft. Because of their injury-ridden season, the Warriors still managed to get a top 10 overall pick in the 2010 NBA draft. And so the draft would look like this. With the first overall pick, the Washington Wizards select John Wall, the 76ers select Evan Turner, the New Jersey Nets select Derek Favors, the Timberwolves at pick 4 select Wesley Johnson, the Sacramento Kings at pick 5 select DeMarcus Cousins, and so, as you guys have seen, all the top 5 picks stay the same as they would have in real life. Wall, Turner, Favors, Johnson, and Cousins are all selected at the first 5 picks and to their original teams. But from the 6th pick and downwards, we have some major changes. The Detroit Pistons with pick 6 select Ekpe Udoh, with the 7th overall pick, the Clippers select Al-Farouq Aminu, and with the 8th overall pick, the Jazz would select Greg Monroe, as Utah takes Monroe because they are desperate for a big after Boozer openly ventures out in free agency. In real life, they were so desperate for a big that season that they traded Koufos and 2 future first round picks for Al Jefferson. They never make the trade to get Al Jefferson, and in fact keep their first round picks, as now they draft Greg Monroe. So Indiana now has pick 9 instead of pick 10, and they select Gordon Hayward. And finally, with pick 10 in the 2010 NBA draft,
the Golden State Warriors select Paul George of Fresno State University.
Now, this pick is absolutely insane for the Golden State Warriors. What seemed to be like a terrible trade originally for the Golden State Warriors now doesn't look so bad anymore, does it? A future all-star small forward that can fit right in with Monte Ellis and Amari Stoudemire. So, heading into the 2010 free agency, the Warriors were desperate to re-sign Amari Stoudemire as his contract was up and now he was an unrestricted free agent. But having the disappointing season they ended up having, Amari wasn't having any of it, and although he liked the draft selection in Paul George, the roster around him wasn't a contender, and Amari simply just wanted to play for New York, and he wanted to play under his favorite coach, Mike D'Antoni, especially after the history they had in Phoenix. And as we all know, Mike D'Antoni was the coach of New York. So, the Knicks and Amari Stoudemire came to an agreement on July 5th, 2010. The sign and trade deal was made official on July 8th, as Stoudemire agreed to an approximately $100 million contract over the span of 5 years. The Warriors would still get a compensation as they still gained David Lee, a solid power forward, but he wasn't the same player as Amari Stoudemire. But at least they got something for losing Amari. Obviously, everything else during free agency stays the same, as the whole of the 2010 free agency was highlighted by the idea of LeBron James leaving Cleveland. As we all know, he ends up with Bosh and Wade in Miami. So going into the 2010-11 season, here's how the Warriors and the Suns rosters would look. The Warriors would run Jeremy Lin at point guard. With no Steph Curry on the team, it meant that in a team with no real point guards, Lin would be able to be the starting point guard, which is a little bit of a worry for the Warriors since Jeremy Lin was actually an undrafted player, but they really needed a point guard and so they picked up Jeremy Lin. Monte Ellis would run the 2, Darrell Arthur would actually run the 3, at the 4 they'd have David Lee, and at the 5 Andres Biedrins. On the bench though, they still had some very good talent, as rookie Paul George would become an all-star in the NBA earlier than he would have in Indiana, since he didn't have to play behind Danny Granger, but obviously he wasn't going to become an all-star this early. He would still be playing behind Darrell Wright, but he would get more minutes than he would have in Indiana. The Warriors made it clear though, after this season on the bench, Paul George would be starting next season. The Suns roster would look like Steve Nash at the 1, Vince Carter at the 2, Grant Hill at the 3, Channing Frye and Robin Lopez at the 4 and 5. Stephen Curry was still coming off the bench, but he played a lot of minutes at the shooting guard, as Jason Richardson was still traded for Vince Carter during the season, but the shooting guard position wasn't set. It would be his last year coming off the bench though, as Nash's play was starting to decline, so he'd be able to start the season at point guard very soon. Not to mention, coming off the bench would actually benefit Curry because playing less minutes means he'd probably have a less amount of injuries during his first couple of seasons than he would have in real life. And so we get on to the 2010-11 season. This season was highlighted by the trade surrounding Carmelo Anthony as he goes from Denver to New York, but everything else pretty much plays out as normal. Dallas again still beats the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals, Blake Griffin still wins Rookie of the Year, and Derrick Rose is still named the youngest MVP of all time. The Phoenix Suns would win 3 more games with Curry on the roster, and Utah would win a few more games with Monroe, but it wouldn't change the standings or their picks. The Warriors lose 2 more games without Stephen Curry and the loss of Amar'e Stoudemire, but the future was bright with Paul George. And because they got David Lee from that sign and trade deal, it didn't affect the Warriors' record too much, as David Lee was a pretty solid player at that point. And so we get into the 2011 NBA Draft. The draft is almost exactly the same, but does have a few minor changes, which are actually not so minor. Since the Golden State Warriors finished with 2 less wins, they end up getting the 9th overall pick and select a point guard since they don't have Stephen Curry, and desperately lack at that point guard position as they're running Jeremy Lin right now. They will select Kemba Walker, but this means they lose out on one of the future All-Stars and a player pivotal to their 2015 and 16 success in Klay Thompson. The Bobcats select Jimmer Fredette, as they too need a point guard as they don't have Kemba Walker now, which means the Bucks select Klay Thompson. Originally, the Bucks selected Jimmer Fredette and traded him to Sacramento. The Bucks still make this swap as they still want to be part of the 3-team trade that leads them to draft Tobias Harris later on in the draft. What it does mean though is that Klay Thompson now gets traded to the Sacramento Kings, teaming him up with DeMarcus Cousins, Isaiah Thomas, and Tyreke Evans. All those players were under the age of 22, so they were looking absolutely amazing for the future. But it does mean the Splash Brothers never exist, which is pretty crazy. As for the Phoenix Suns, they select Marcus Morris instead of Markieff Morris, as they finished with a better record than originally. But in the end, they would both end up playing for Phoenix anyway, so it didn't really matter. And since the Pacers don't have Paul George, but still get the 15th overall pick, they select Kawhi Leonard and actually end up keeping him this time, not trading him to the San Antonio Spurs, since they need a small forward as they don't have Paul George now. George Hill stays in San Antonio. Also, remembering the Pacers still have Gordon Hayward from the 2010 NBA Draft, and now they also have Kawhi Leonard, well, Gordon Hayward will play the 2 and Kawhi Leonard will play the 3. The Pacers were looking great for the future as well. So on we go into the 2011-2012 season. Once again, we don't see much change at the top of the standing since most of the moves that have been made have been from teams that eventually would be contending for championships, but as of now, they are young teams with players finding their way through the league. Players like Curry, Paul George, Klay Thompson, and Kemba Walker, they're young players and they don't really have much of an impact at this point in time. But the 2011-2012 season was the season that Stephen Curry had an injury-riddled year. So the Suns would lose 6 more games and finish with a record of 27 and 39 in a lockout-shortened season, with Curry injured for pretty much the entire year. The Warriors would actually gain a solid 8 more wins with the emergence of Paul George and the new starting point guard of Kemba Walker. Monte Ellis never ends up getting traded to the Bucks as they like his play and they don't have Stephen Curry, so they actually keep him. The Kings would also gain 4 more wins with Klay Thompson instead of Jimmer Fredette, and the Utah Jazz would fall out of the playoff race since they never end up getting Al Jefferson or Gordon Hayward, simply because, remember, they drafted Greg Monroe, which means the Rockets fall into the playoffs. The Pacers would finish as the 5th seed instead of the 3rd seed with Kawhi and Hayward instead of Paul George, since Kawhi wasn't all that great in his rookie season and came off the bench. And Hayward was a solid shooting guard in the league, but he hadn't fully developed yet either. The Rookie of the Year though still goes to Kyrie Irving, and the season winds down to LeBron James taking the MVP home and winning his first NBA championship, beating the Oklahoma City Thunder with a young core of Westbrook, Harden, and Durant. And so we go into the 2012 NBA Draft. Up until the 6th overall pick, everything stays the same. The Suns did end up getting the 6th overall pick, but since they already have Stephen Curry and need a small forward, they select Harrison Barnes. The Warriors need a center and end up selecting John Henson, and the Warriors would still get a steal with their 35th overall pick as they'd still select Draymond Green, since they need a power forward too. Some things just don't change, I guess. The Sacramento Kings fall into the 10th overall pick, not the 5th overall pick, but still end up selecting the same player as originally, as they select Thomas Robinson, since no other teams needed a power forward between the 5th and the 10th overall range. Other notable changes see the Utah Jazz taking Jeremy Lamb since they don't have Gordon Hayward, and need someone to pair up with Greg Monroe. This pick will be very important. The 2012 offseason saw 2 stars leaving their respective teams. Dwight Howard still joins the LA Lakers along with Steve Nash, which means with Steve Nash now gone from Phoenix, it means Stephen Curry will finally start for the Suns next season. Apart from the move of Dwight Howard, the offseason was also headlined with reports saying that the Oklahoma City Thunder was shopping James Harden. The Rockets couldn't make a trade involving Jeremy Lamb since they actually didn't have him. The Phoenix Suns wanted James Harden originally, but then they realized the defense of Stephen Curry and James Harden on the same team would not turn out well for them. The Jazz, though, they had Jeremy Lamb, and they were prepared to send the Thunder Jeremy Lamb and Derek Favors for James Harden and a few other pieces, since they already had Greg Monroe and Paul Millsap and didn't really need Derek Favors. And so, the Utah Jazz now had a team of Greg Monroe, Paul Millsap, and James Harden. And they also made another trade acquiring George Hill from the San Antonio Spurs, who never got traded to the Indiana Pacers earlier. And the Spurs gained DeMarre Carroll from Utah, a good replacement for a team that never got Kawhi Leonard. And so we get into the 2012-13 season. This was the year that Stephen Curry would finally get the starting spot for the Phoenix Suns, as Nash was now gone from the team. The Suns roster would look like this: Stephen Curry at the 1, PJ Tucker at the 2, Harrison Barnes at the 3, Markieff Morris at the 4, and Marcin Gortat at the center position. The Warriors now had a lineup of Kemba Walker, Monte Ellis, Paul George, David Lee at power forward, and John Henson at center. Both teams would be very competitive, but once again, they wouldn't make the playoffs in the stacked Western Conference. You have to remember that Kemba Walker, Paul George, and John Henson were all pretty young at this point, so you can't expect them to be making the playoffs this early. They definitely would have made it in the East though. The Utah Jazz jump up into the playoffs with James Harden on the team, but it didn't really matter anyway, as this was the year of LeBron James and the Miami Heat, as the Heat now won back-to-back NBA championships facing up against the San Antonio Spurs. LeBron was named the MVP that season and the Finals MVP, Paul George was named to the All-NBA third team, and Stephen Curry had a solid year, averaging 23 points per game. During the 2013 NBA draft, the only notable changes were that the Bobcats fall to the first overall pick, since they never got Kemba Walker, and actually do worse than the record of 7-59, which, keep in mind, is pretty hard to do. But their luck ends up turning around, as they ended up selecting Victor Oladipo with their first overall pick, and they didn't mess up by choosing Anthony Bennett. He still ends up with the Cleveland Cavaliers at pick number 2. Otto Porter ends up in Orlando, and Cody Zeller ends up in Washington. The other notable change was obviously that the Phoenix Suns had a much better season than originally, and so they end up going from the 5th overall pick to the 9th overall pick, and they take the only shooting guard available in CJ McCollum, which actually benefits them more. In the 2013 offseason, Dwight Howard still leaves the Los Angeles Lakers since he absolutely hated playing with Kobe Bryant. But as the Rockets never had James Harden, which was the main reason he left LA to join Houston, he decides to join a contender, and he joins the Dallas Mavericks with Dirk and Monte Ellis, since Monte Ellis left the Warriors through free agency. And since the Suns had Stephen Curry, they don't make the trade to get Eric Bledsoe, and he stays in LA. Heading into the 2013-14 season, plenty of changes were being made in the playoff race. The Sacramento Kings with Clay and DeMarcus make the playoffs, as well as the Phoenix Suns with Stephen Curry and Harrison Barnes, and the Warriors with Paul George and Kemba Walker, as well as Draymond Green. But he wasn't all that great during this year. He more so hit his peak the year after. The Spurs fall a seed without Kawhi Leonard, and the Pacers stay the same with Kawhi instead of Paul George, as they finish as the first seed. The Utah Jazz also make the playoffs with James Harden and Paul Millsap, as he never joins Atlanta since he wanted to stick with James Harden. With these new standings, the Grizzlies, Rockets, and Dallas Mavericks all fall out of the playoff race, which was a huge disappointment for Dwight Howard and the Dallas Mavericks, since all he wanted to do was compete for a championship. The MVP still goes to Kevin Durant of the Oklahoma City Thunder. For the teams that I mentioned in the Western Conference, almost all of those teams lose in the first round. The Suns would lose to the Spurs, the Kings actually beat the Trailblazers with Aldridge and Lillard, the Warriors lose to the Clippers, and the Oklahoma City Thunder beat Harden in Utah. Overall though, it was still the Spurs versus the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals. It was really close this time though. Considering the Spurs didn't have Kawhi Leonard, as he was now a member of the Indiana Pacers, and Kawhi also in real life won the Finals MVP, not to mention he played a huge part in locking down LeBron, but since the Spurs did have DeMarre Carroll, who actually had a very solid season in real life this season, it was the Spurs who would still win the NBA championship. This time not in 5 games, they would actually win it in 7. After the loss to the San Antonio Spurs, as we all know, LeBron James took his talents back home to Cleveland, which still happens in this scenario. But before we get into that, we have to get into the 2014 NBA Draft. The Charlotte Bobcats, or now known as the Charlotte Hornets, in back-to-back years get the #1 overall picks. The previous season, they selected Victor Oladipo, and now they'd have the chance to select Andrew Wiggins, which they do. The Cleveland Cavaliers get the second overall pick, and they select Jabari Parker, and the Rockets, without James Harden or Dwight Howard, fall to the third overall pick and select Joel Embiid. The Bucks select Aaron Gordon. The Jazz don't fall into the 5th overall pick since they have James Harden, so the Magic get the 5th overall pick and select Dante Exum, and the 76ers select Julius Randle. And those were pretty much the only notable changes. Free agency was the main headline of this year though. LeBron James returned to Cleveland, and Love was traded to Cleveland as well, but instead of Wiggins being traded to Minnesota, they instead have to trade Jabari Parker, as the Cavs selected Jabari Parker during the draft, and obviously they don't have Andrew Wiggins. Chris Bosh, Carmelo Anthony, Dirk Nowitzki, and Kyle Lowry all signed with their previous teams, but one signing did end up happening. The Suns still get Isaiah Thomas from the Sacramento Kings, as Isaiah and DeMarcus had some pretty bad chemistry issues. The Phoenix Suns will use Isaiah Thomas as the 6th man. The Warriors actually signed shooting guard Lance Stevenson, who instead of going to Charlotte like in real life, ends up in Golden State, since Charlotte already had Victor Oladipo. To give you an update on the notable rosters, the Phoenix Suns had Stephen Curry, CJ McCollum, Harrison Barnes, Markieff Morris, and Marcin Gortat, and they had Isaiah Thomas as the 6th man. The Warriors had Kemba Walker at the 1, Lance Stevenson at the shooting guard, Paul George at the 3, Draymond Green at the 4, and John Henson at the 5. But the Warriors would actually lose Paul George for almost the entire season, as he still suffers that horrific leg injury at the USA scrimmage. So that pretty much cancels out any hope of the Warriors making a run for the championship this season. The 2015 season was the most interesting, as this was the year where the Golden State Warriors won the NBA championship, but obviously now that's not happening. Originally, Steph won the MVP, but now that he's not going to be part of a team that will win 67 games, and instead he's part of a team to win just under 50 games, LeBron instead takes the MVP in his new Cleveland Cavaliers team. And in fact, he leads them to the conference finals to face up against the Indiana Pacers with Kawhi Leonard and Gordon Hayward. Originally, it was the Atlanta Hawks and the Cleveland Cavaliers in the East, but since the Hawks don't have Paul Millsap or Damari Carroll, they don't make it. Anyway, the Cavs win that series in 6 games up against the Indiana Pacers and advance to the NBA Finals. And in the West, in the conference finals, it was the Sacramento Kings with Klay Thompson, DeMarcus Cousins, and Tyreke Evans versus the Utah Jazz with their duo of James Harden and Paul Millsap. But they still had a solid big man presence in Greg Monroe to lock down the middle. In the end though, it was the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Sacramento Kings in the 2015 NBA Finals, as the Kings were too strong for the Utah Jazz with James Harden. Ultimately though, as you know, this was the season that both Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love were injured during the playoffs, and LeBron was doing his all to bring his team to victory each and every night. The big man presence of DeMarcus Cousins, though, was ultimately too strong for the Cleveland Cavaliers, who had Timothy Mozgov on him. LeBron could only do so much without Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love, but yes, Klay Thompson and DeMarcus brought a championship to Sacramento. There is no doubt if LeBron had Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love through these NBA Finals, they would have beaten the Sacramento Kings with Klay Thompson and DeMarcus Cousins. But since LeBron didn't have 2 of his big 3, it was the Kings that ultimately took the NBA championship of 2015. Wow, I never thought I'd say that. After the season, Tim Duncan announces his retirement a few seasons earlier, as he knows that the Spurs probably don't have another chance to win a championship ring since Kawhi is not on the team, and he feels like they're going to be in a steady decline. The 2015 NBA draft has the Timberwolves still selecting Karl Anthony Towns and the Los Angeles Lakers still selecting D'Angelo Russell. The Hornets now get the 3rd overall pick and select Jahlil Okafor, giving them a young, nice trio of Oladipo, Wiggins, and Jahlil Okafor. The Phoenix Suns, however, don't get Devin Booker, as he gets picked up by the Portland Trail Blazers, who don't have CJ McCollum, so they trade up during the NBA draft, trading away Nicholas Batum and Wesley Matthews to acquire the 13th overall pick, and ultimately they end up selecting Devin Booker to pair up with Damian Lillard, as they know that LaMarcus Aldridge will probably leave during this offseason, so they prepare for a rebuild. In free agency, the only notable move was LaMarcus Aldridge, who would actually leave the Portland Trail Blazers, but doesn't end up going to the San Antonio Spurs, as they don't have the squad he's looking for to compete for a championship. A team that does have a decent squad though is the Dallas Mavericks, as they have Dwight Howard at center, Dirk Nowitzki, who would be willing to play a similar type of role that Tim Duncan played when LaMarcus arrived in San Antonio, and the Mavericks also had Monte Ellis as well. But LaMarcus pretty much just signed there because he wanted to go back home. Phoenix still signs Tyson Chandler, as they'd lose Marcin Gortat, who ends up in San Antonio. So going to the 2015-16 season, the Pacers, Cavaliers, and Raptors are the top teams in the East throughout the year, but in the West, there were a ton of changes. The Kings, Thunder, Clippers, Dallas, and Utah, as well as the Warriors, who have a fully healthy Paul George back, and an all-star player in Draymond Green, and a solid point guard in Kemba Walker, finished as the 2nd seed, and the Suns, with Stephen Curry and CJ McCollum, finished as the 6th seed. Those were the top teams in the West. The season MVP actually goes to Russell Westbrook of the Oklahoma City Thunder, as although the West had some competition, they also didn't have the 73 Golden State Warriors team to compete up against, nor the 67-win San Antonio Spurs team to compete up against. Stephen Curry, although putting up incredible scoring numbers, couldn't win the MVP, simply because his play wasn't translating to as many wins and his teammates weren't good enough to give him the open shots like he gets in real life. Anyway, in the playoffs though, a lot of competition was happening in the West, but the Cavaliers were steamrolling the East. So in the Eastern Conference Finals, it was the Cleveland Cavaliers once again facing up against the Indiana Pacers. And once again, the Cavaliers with LeBron James were just too good, and they'd advance to the NBA Finals. And in the Western Conference, it was the Oklahoma City Thunder facing up against the Golden State Warriors with Paul George, Draymond Green, and Kemba Walker. This time though, the Thunder wouldn't choke this series away, and they'd advance to the NBA Finals to face up against the Cleveland Cavaliers. But ultimately, this would be the year where LeBron James would still bring his championship home he had promised back to Cleveland. And so we come to the end. You might be thinking, no MVP, no championship, no anything. And honestly, no matter which way you look at it, Stephen Curry, no matter how great of a player he is, needs the teammates and the right system around him in order to win. If you ask any NBA player or anyone that knows anything about basketball, it really matters what system you get drafted to, what team you get drafted to, and the teammates that you have around you. Just look at Allen Iverson, Tracy McGrady, and LeBron James before he went to Miami. You look at these guys, and you know how amazingly talented these players are. But either the players around these guys, or the actual team or system that they were drafted to, had poor management or just weren't very good. So being drafted into the right system is key to success. And for Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors, they have pretty much built up the perfect team through the NBA draft. So wow, pretty crazy what would have happened if Stephen Curry was traded on draft night back in 2009. It probably means that we will never see Kevin Durant sign with the Golden State Warriors, and he'd be staying in Oklahoma to play with Russell Westbrook, Steven Adams, and probably still be able to play with Victor Oladipo next season. Anyway, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I'm back on the what if grind, so let me know what if you'd like to see next. I'd honestly appreciate it so much if you guys could drop a like on this video and share this video with a friend if you think they'd enjoy it. And for my current subscribers, I appreciate all the support that you show each and every video. I really appreciate it. And if you're new around here, I make a whole bunch of NBA videos, what ifs, and a whole bunch more NBA 2K17 videos coming soon. So yeah, it's been your Bonnie Smith. Please subscribe if you're new. I'm out. Peace.
League of very valuable players. You are the most valuable. It is my pleasure to award to you the Kia NBA 2010-11 MVP.